Welcome back to the review space. In this video, I'm going to talk about the top 5 most overrated horror movies. That's right, which horror films, top 5 at least, are the most overrated. And the reason I chose top 5 instead of top 10 is that I honestly couldn't really think of top 10, and so I chose 5 instead. It's actually kind of difficult to find more than 5 overrated films that I thought were supremely overrated and overhyped, and it was given too much critical praise, because horror films don't get that much high critical rankings anyway. Alright, so what are we waiting for? Number 1, The Babadook. The Babadook is a 2014 psychological horror film, and this movie got some pretty high critical praise. People tend to generally enjoy it, and the performances, people tend to praise this film, the atmosphere specifically. And also, this movie is a psychological film, and just people like the acting. People tend to enjoy the acting of this movie. Basically, it was apparently based on the short film from 2005, Monster. I've never seen that one, the short film, but this movie is basically about a widow, this woman named Amelia. She has a 6-year-old son, so this young boy, Samuel. And this young boy is displaying some really weird behavior, this erratic behavior. He's acting really strange, and he starts not sleeping anymore, and he's obsessed with this monster. He claims to, see this monster, and he wants to fight this monster off and protect his mom from this imaginary monster, this Babadook. So Amelia, the mother, she has to deal with it, and she has to deal with her son kind of being very intrusive, for lack of a better word, just disturbing her sleep, and just constantly just being a pain in the ass, for lack of a better word. And she has to deal with her emotional issues as well, for after losing her husband. And this movie, I like some of the acting in some parts of this film, and I did like the atmosphere, but I just thought it was a really boring movie for the most part. This was a extremely boring film. I didn't like the pacing. It just felt like a long build-up for the most part. Throughout the movie, we're waiting for the Babadook monster. We see glimpses of it here and there. And it's basically it's a monster. It's a tall, pale-faced humanoid with a top hat. So it kind of reminded me a little bit of what like a cartoonish version of Jack the Ripper, a Jack the Ripper type of evil character. That's its character design. But the thing is that, again, a boring film. I thought that some of the acting was good, but some of it was also kind of annoying. The kid in this movie was kind of annoying in some parts, and I just generally don't like kids in movies, because I think kids are just an annoyance, a distraction, and they just don't add to the movie. They just take away from the movie, because it's either they're really annoying, they come across as amateurish in the way that they're presented, the way that they act. The kid here is kind of a mixed bag. Sometimes I go, oh wow, I feel sympathetic towards the kid for having to deal with bullshit, but at the same time, I feel like some of the stuff that the kid does is too just stupid, annoying, or just a distraction, and I just didn't really like it that much. I thought this movie was just an overall boring film. I mean, it got to a point where even like the director for The Exorcist, the Exorcist director, said that, the Babadook is the scariest movie of all time, or scariest movie that they've seen. The director of The Exorcist from I think it was the 70s movie, early 70s, and that's another movie that is given I think far too much credit and praise, was The Exorcist. Must have been a hell of a scary movie for its time, but I'm not a religious person anyway, not in many years. I'm really an atheist now, but so The Exorcist was never, the whole demon thing, a woman turning into a demon, and her being a spawn of Satan or whatever, or possessed by Satan or the devil and stuff like that. just never really got into it. I just don't think it's just not a realistic thing. It's completely unbelievable. I just can't. I don't care about religious stuff. But anyway, yeah, the Exorcist director was like, oh, this is the scariest movie of all time, you know. And it's like, no, it's not. Not at all, you know. The Babadook is the scariest film ever. Not even close. What are you talking about? It's not that scary. Some creepy moments, sure, but it's really not that frightening. For the most part, just a boring movie. It felt like it dragged on a little bit. It felt like it was more of a it's like psychologically, it felt like the woman was being tortured throughout the movie. She was having all these psychological breakdown, but at the same time, it just didn't scare me, and it didn't. It wasn't this amazing horror movie. It wasn't a great horror movie. I thought for the most part, it was just a really boring movie where nothing happens. Really, nothing happens in this movie for the most part. It's just like, there's the monster, it pops out every now and then, it creeps around, but at the same time, it's not a frightening movie, it's not a scary movie, it's just kind of an annoying movie, and it's just kind of a shitty, overrated movie that I wouldn't put it up there as one of the best of all time at all. I mean, again, some creepy moments, but nothing special. You're not missing out when you watch The Babadook. So, another movie that I'd rather suggest instead of this movie, instead of The Babadook, would be something like The Sixth Sense. I thought The Sixth Sense from the late 90s. It's an American supernatural horror thriller movie from M. Night Shyamalan, and this was back when M. Night Shyamalan was kind of a respectable director, where he was still kind of new. There was still a bit of a novelty in his style. And then, you know, later on, like after over the years, his twist endings would become a cliche and become a laughingstock. But around the Sixth Sense era, I mean, this movie was like nominated for Academy Awards. This frickin' movie, and the similarity here with Babadook is that you got a young boy, a troubled, isolated boy, played by Haley Joel Osment. The character's name is Cole Sear, I guess, and it also stars Bruce Willis as the psychologist. He's the psychologist in this movie, and he's got to deal with this young boy. And over the course of the storyline, or over the course of the movie, in The Sixth Sense, they uncover certain things, and they see certain freaky things, and he sees certain creepy things, and it's just a really well-paced movie, better directed, better acting, not even just more creepy, more of an interesting movie, and I really did enjoy the ending. I mean, the first time that The Sixth Sense came out, it was a novelty, and it was a great little film that had a good twist, and it was just a cool movie. It was a great movie. It's a nice horror movie, and for the first time in many years, an actual horror movie got some critical praise that it was actually valid. It actually, like, that was a good movie. And you compare the kid in this film to the kid in The Babadook, I just thought the kid in The Babadook was just kind of an annoyance in some parts. He was almost over the top with his like gadgets and his weapons and things like that. And the kid in The Sixth Sense was more believable. He was more relatable. He was more of a realistic character. Whereas the kid in The Babadook was just kind of annoying in some parts. Again, there's some parts that I felt bad for the young boy, but in other parts it was just like, man, this kid sucks, you know. So I thought The Sixth Sense was just a better film that I would rather recommend that over the frickin' Babadook, in terms of a young boy seeing creepy shit and having an adult there in the same story and just kind of helping him out. Number 2, A Nightmare on Elm Street. A Nightmare on Elm Street, featuring Freddy Krueger, starring Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger. And this is a 1984 American supernatural slasher movie, horror film. And the thing too with this film is that when this came out, I'm sure like the special effects were really good, and it created buzz, and it made money at the box office, and it built this reputation of it put Freddy Krueger as one of these iconic horror type of characters, like somebody from Jason from the Friday series, or Michael Myers from the Halloween. But the thing is that I never really liked this movie. I was never a big fan of the Freddy Krueger character. He was charismatic, and he was kind of a funny, quirky, kind of strange demon, from the nightmares, and he would haunt teenagers in their nightmares, and he would basically kill them, and he would stalk them. There's a dark secret from a long time ago, and there's a backstory to Freddy Krueger as well. So these young teenagers got to deal with this nightmarish stalker, the serial killer, basically. I just think it's kind of a cheesy 80s gimmick. It's too much of an 80s, not campy, but like very 1980s, very dated style, very dated presentation. And even when I watched it, like for the first time, I just didn't feel. I wasn't impressed with the movie. I thought it was just a little bit hokey, a little bit like, oh god damn, like who gives like this? This is so lame. You know what I mean? It felt like a lame, just 80s film that is like stuck in the 80s. The special effects were kind of cool. I thought some of the effects that they did, and considering the relatively lower budget of this movie, and they were able to produce some really cool looking effects, that was an achievement, and that was cool. And also, Freddy himself, his actual design, the way that he looks, he does look like a really weird, creepy looking, villain in this film. But aside from that, I mean, even like the killing scenes and the gore scenes and certain, the bloody scenes in this film, the kill scenes, they were unrealistic, completely unrealistic. Of course, it's a supernatural slasher movie, a horror film. But I just felt like this movie wasn't that great. It didn't really scare me. It didn't really creep me out. I mean, I guess I can understand maybe like a little kid, like a 5-year-old, being kind of scared of Freddy Krueger. It wasn't intimidating. It wasn't like, it didn't make me feel creeped out. It didn't make me. I just kind of laughed at it. I just kind of laughed at this ridiculous freaking character design and the situations that they're going to sleep. They're afraid of going to sleep and shit because they're gonna be killed in their sleep. It sucks. I think it's a crappy premise. It's a terrible setup because it's unrealistic. People don't get killed by frickin' fictional nightmare characters. I mean, there are certain experiences that people have at nighttime when they go to sleep, things like night terrors and things like that, and some people die in their sleep, but that's like usually health related issues. But as far as this Nightmare on Elm Street, it's a very dated film, but it suffers from being dated, being an 80s movie and having that premise. It just doesn't work in this modern context, and even just looking back on it, it just isn't it's not a great horror movie. I never really understood why frickin' Freddy Krueger and the Nightmare series became like this big film series. I understand Wes Craven, he's a legend, but I was never really creeped out or freaked out by Nightmare on Elm Street. There's many other, Wes Craven productions that were better, that were more intimidating, and just made me feel more anxious, and actually were more convincing horror movies. I thought the Scream series were better. A movie like People Under the Stairs was better. So Nightmare on Elm Street to me just wasn't a great movie. Very overrated in my opinion. Really nothing special. And it's just a film that's kind of stuck in the 80s. And even like the remake I believe the remake was about 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. It was okay. I thought the remake was alright, but again, falling under the same kind of the trappings of an 80s film, and the way it's presented, and the way that the character is, the way it's basically a dream, a serial killer from a dream. You go to sleep, and it kills you in your sleep, and some bullshit like that. It still feels ridiculous. So, a better movie I'd like to suggest instead of Nightmare on Elm Street would be Final Destination. I thought Final Destination from the early 2000s, it was basically an American supernatural horror movie. So here we go again with the supernatural stuff. But this time, this one was basically just death itself killing off teenagers. So the teenagers are themselves the targets as well. And one of them, or at least a couple of them, would end up having these premonitions. A premonition is basically they would have these little visions that they would see before something deadly or dangerous, a dangerous event would happen, where just about everybody dies in an explosion or an accident. But it's really creepy, and it's really there's a sense of inevitability in these movies where the characters just get axed. They are killed off by this supernatural death presence. So Final Destination from the early 2000s, and from what I understand, one of the producers or some of the people involved in this, they were basically inspired by Nightmare on Elm Street from way back in the day. Like, I think the person that was either involved with the production of this, he wrote a prequel. There's some kind of story that was like a prequel to Nightmare on Elm Street, something to do with the story. And so I guess that kind of morphed, and over time it changed, and it just became this Final Destination idea of somebody having some kind of vision or some kind of premonition when they're taking a rest or resting on a chair, or maybe even lying in bed or something like that, and then they see this premonition, and so something bad is about to happen. So that's from what I understand is one of the people that was involved with the creation of Final Destination. So there is a tie to Nightmare on Elm Street in that sense. Another movie that I'd like to suggest instead of Nightmare on Elm Street is Candyman. So another supernatural horror movie. This one is from the early 90s, 1992. This one starred the great actor, what's the name? Todd. Yeah, Tony Todd. And he was tremendous as the Candyman character. It's basically this supernatural being from beyond the grave, and he is this entity that kills people. And it came from an urban legend, basically a person that died a long time ago, and he comes back as a spirit or something like that, just a killer, a killing entity that kills individuals even during the daytime. And so this is kind of similar to Nightmare on Elm Street, especially the Freddy Krueger presentation. But I think the Candyman was just more, it was more of a mature, more interesting character. The music was pretty damn good, and I just thought the presentation and the acting and the storytelling was more sophisticated, for lack of a better word. It wasn't so teenagery, killy teenager, catered towards like little younger people, like a young teenage teeny bopper demographic, but rather Candyman was more towards an adult oriented demographic. It felt more gritty and serious. So I liked Candyman from the early 90s, kind of an underrated movie in its own right as well. Number 3, Cujo. Cujo is a 1983 American psychological horror thriller film from the early 80s, but it was based on a Stephen King novel. And so with Stephen King and his stories, they're kind of a mixed bag. They tend to get either mixed reviews or negative reviews, but this particular movie, Cujo, had generally positive reception, and it kind of has a cult following after it came out. It did alright when it first released in the 80s, and it was basically about this dog, this killer dog. It's a Saint Bernard, and it gets bitten by a bat at the beginning of the film, and it becomes a killer dog. It becomes a loose canine that kills people and attacks people. Particularly, it terrorizes a mother and her child inside the vehicle, and they get terrorized by this freaking dog. When I was a kid in the 90s, when Cujo came out, this was one of those movies where it was always given references. So it's like, if you see like a dog, or there's a story about a dog, or a reference to a dog that's crazy or deranged or something like that, or a dog that was really aggressive, people would go, "Whoa, look at Cujo." It's like, holy shit, remember that movie Cujo? Like, wow, Cujo. Cujo became synonymous with a dog that was basically an aggressive, a highly aggressive, or a killer dog. And so that made me think like, wow, this movie is probably like a really dope movie. It just gave it the impression, because at the time in the 90s I'd never seen the movie. It wasn't until a little bit later, a few years later, that I saw Cujo. So when I finally saw it, and you know, the premise, you know, the dog gets bit by a fucking bat, and I'm sitting here like, okay, got bit by a bat. Okay, that's kind of a, okay, all right. And then so the dog starts attacking people. But throughout this movie was basically a really boring film. Cujo is a boring movie, and that's the main flaws, and the main problem I got with this film was that it basically just dragged on. It felt like, you know, certain scenes would be dragged on. It felt they were just dragged out. Certain scenes that weren't even scary. And even the killing scenes themselves were just kind of, they felt dragged out. It felt like it just dragged on, and they were trying to, I guess they were trying to make it feel like the dog is this menacing, unstoppable, rabid dog. But for the most part, I'm just sitting there watching this movie, and it's just like, just fucking shoot the thing, shoot the damn dog, or, you know, call the, whatever, what is it, the dog catcher? Call those people, and take care of this frickin' mutt. I mean, this dog is, sometimes it feels like this dog is like a bear, you know, like this movie would have probably been better if it was a killer bear, because in that sense, I mean, this dog is pretty big, the dog that plays Cujo, but still, I just felt like, wow, it's kind of an adorable dog still, you know, it's still kind of a cute dog, and it's a Saint Bernard, so it's like, it's a dog, but it's like, it's a killer dog, and it's fucking, it's got, you know, pointy, sharp fangs, and I'm sitting here like, it's really not that good. I mean, this movie sucks, and, you know, this movie is underwhelming. This movie doesn't make me feel scared or anything like that. It's just a dog that happens to be a fucking asshole, and it just wants to, and you know, I guess it's a rabid dog, so it's trying to kill people, but at the same time, it's a boring movie. It's a boring film. It's just, for the most part, it's just people not getting killed. It's just people talking and just dragged on scenes. You know, you got this young kid, and he claims to see a dog, and he claims to see something from his closet, and this was early on in the movie. And it's one of those stupid fucking, like, Stephen King style presentation where they try to make it, they try to set it up with this atmospheric kind of thing. They try to make atmosphere for this movie and try to give a feel of creepiness, that Stephen King creepy vibe, but it's really not creepy. This movie isn't scary or creepy. It's just kind of, obnoxious too. And that's my problem too with dogs. Like, you know, if it's like a killer dog or like a killer animal, but particularly with dogs, I just find dogs that are always growling and barking to be very obnoxious. It's not intimidating or scary, it's just annoying and obnoxious. When a dog is constantly barking all the time and growling and and you hear that all throughout, you know, every time that Cujo would attack, and it's just like, this is just fucking irritating. Like, this movie is boring as hell. Boring as hell. I didn't really care about the people that he attacked. And just an overall uninteresting dog horror movie. I mean, yeah. So a better movie I'd like to suggest involving an animal in particular that attacks people would be Razorback. So this movie, Razorback, is from the 80s. It's from 1984, an Australian natural horror film. This one was a pretty good movie, I thought. You know, kind of an underrated movie. Not a lot of people talk about this movie or even know about it. So this movie is basically about this big, gigantic wild boar attacking and terrorizing the Australian outback. So you have these people living in Australia getting attacked and killed by this freaking wild boar. And it's killing and devouring people. It actually, I guess, feasts on them. So that's kind of scary, you know, and that's kind of intimidating. And what I really liked about Razorback was that, you know, I mean, this movie had great cinematography. There's like certain scenes in this movie that were really kind of not surreal, but very artistic looking, very interesting. Like the music was really cool. There's this one moment where the main character, he kind of wakes up, and then the sky was all like weird looking, and it was just a nice segment, and I could watch that particular like little segment over and over again. And it wasn't even like a scary moment. It was just kind of an artistic, like little cool moment. You remember that Simpsons episode in the TV show The Simpsons when Homer, he starts tripping out? He started tripping out, and he fucking started seeing like pyramids and shit, and he was talking to a fox. And so there was these really vivid imagery and these wild, weird, strange, dream-esque imagery. I think it was after he ate or he swallowed that chili, that really chili, red hot chili pepper, and then he ended up tripping out. So that it's kind of similar to that. Anyway, I thought Razorback was a tremendous killer animal movie, and much better, I think, than frickin' Cujo. And they're both from the 1980s, so I mean, they both have that 80s presentation, but Razorback was just more enjoyable. I think it was more entertaining. It was just a better film, because, and also with the Razorback frickin' boar, it doesn't appear, throughout most of the movie. It's kind of like with Jaws. You don't really see it until the very end. This wild boar is just kind of a presence. But the way that they filmed it, and the way that, it was just a well-filmed movie, I think. Much better, much more enjoyable, and much better, I think, than than Cujo. I thought Cujo was just overrated. Typical, standard, crappy horror movie. Number 4, The Descent. The Descent. This movie came out in the mid-2000s, I think 2005. This is a British adventure horror movie. This one basically follows 6 women having entered an unmapped cave. They go inside this cave. They're basically, I don't know, what do you call it, spelunking? Cave divers, whatever the hell they are. They end up becoming trapped in the cave and are hunted by troglodyte flesh-eating humanoids. Troglodyte means, I actually don't know what the fuck that means. It just says in this description. So, troglodyte, I mean, I guess they're underground? I don't know. Troglodyte, that's an interesting word. But they eat flesh as well, so these cave-dwelling humanoid creatures living in the caves. This movie I didn't like because none of the characters were likable to me. I thought the characters were just either irritating, annoying, or I just didn't care about them. I had no investment in them. They felt like disposable, just women characters that were just there to be fucking killed. So I didn't have that connection. I didn't feel like I cared about any of them. So when they would end up getting killed or whatever in this freaking cave system, I was just like, you know what, I don't give a shit. I really don't care. Let them fucking die. Like, who gives a shit? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I thought the cave humanoids themselves were kind of cool looking, but we don't even really see them for the most part. Like, we don't really even, like, know much about them. They're just kind of there to fucking kill these people. And so, we don't... Again, it's like it's an overrated movie because I remember when this movie came out, and then, after the years came out, and it just got a lot of, like, buzz, and it became kind of this cult movie, and it's like, oh, The Descent, what a great movie. Oh, The Sleeper, what a sleeper hit, or what a sleeper movie, what a great little movie, The Descent. And I'm sitting here like, that movie isn't really that good, okay? I didn't like any of the stupid characters. I thought even like the setting was this really dark fucking cave, so, I mean, not a lot of lighting, so the actual environment wasn't that interesting. It didn't really look that cool or, fucking fascinating. It's just a stupid fucking cave, and they're getting killed off by these flesh-eating humanoids. And it's like, whatever, I don't care. It's not a big deal to me. Like, who gives a shit? It's not that fascinating. They're basically just glorified golems, right, from Lord of the Rings, and they're killing these women. And these women were stupid enough to be stuck in the cave to begin with. Who the fuck goes inside caves for fun. It sounds so boring, you know what I mean? Like, it just sounds like such a... You have no fucking life that you want to go inside a fucking cave? It sucks, man. This movie is overrated. So a better movie I'd like to suggest instead is Pontorum. Pontorum is from 2009. It is a science fiction horror movie with elements of Lovecraftian horror and survival adventure. Ooh, sounds exotic? I don't know. But it features Dennis Quaid, Ben Foster. Thought it was a really enjoyable movie. It didn't get a lot of critical praise. I thought it was actually it was critically panned, but I thought it was a pretty good movie for what it was worth. It basically, it's these people inside I guess a spaceship or something like that, and they wake up because they were sleeping in it, kind of like the beginning of Alien. You know how they were sleeping in those little pods or cells or whatever, and then they wake up after like sleeping for a long time. So the same thing here with Pontorum. They suffer this some kind of syndrome, ODS, which is basically some psychosis caused by deep space, some kind of emotional stress, and then they end up having like paranoia and delirium, and like it fucks with their head, it fucks with their brain. But in this movie, they also have to deal with flesh-eating humanoids. That's right. So similar to The Descent has flesh-eating human-like monsters. Pontorum also has that. So there's a similarity there, but I just thought Pontorum was just a much more enjoyable movie about flesh-eating pale humanoid monster creatures. So I'd rather suggest Pontorum. That was a pretty good movie. Number 5, Jacob's Ladder. Jacob's Ladder. This one is from the early 90s, I believe 1990. Way back in the day. God damn, I was only 3 years old when this movie came out. Basically, it was a psychological horror movie, and it starred Tim Robbins and Elizabeth Pena. Rest in peace, by the way, to Elizabeth Pena. I was kind of surprised when I found out that she was dead. You know, she died, I think, a couple of years ago. And she basically starred in like La Bamba from the late 80s, and she was in Rush Hour, the first Rush Hour from the late 90s. So she was around for a long time, but in this movie, alongside Tim Robbins, this film, it's kind of a weird movie because they go for the psychological horror. It's basically Tim Robbins. His character Jacob was a Vietnam veteran, and he ends up experiencing these weird, fragmented, bizarre flashbacks and hallucinations. He starts seeing things in his life after the Vietnam experience. They end up haunting him. So he has to deal with these hauntings, and his fucking state gets worse and worse and worse, and he's trying to figure out what's going on with his life, with his mind. I thought it was just kind of a shitty movie. I didn't like it. And for years I heard about Jacob's Ladder. You know, Jacob's Ladder, it's so psychological. What a great horror movie. Oh, from the early 90s. You know, it's a classic. Jacob's Ladder. What an underrated movie. What an underrated movie. When I watched it, I was like, you know what? This movie didn't do anything for me. Jacob's Ladder is fucking meh. You know, it didn't impress me that much. I just thought it was kind of boring in many parts. I didn't like the characters. I didn't like Tim Robbins' character. I didn't like any of them. I didn't care about any of it. I didn't care about his backstory. I just didn't care because this guy was having fucked up mental issues or whatever, but I'm just sitting here like, well, maybe he's going crazy or something. You know, there's a lot of like schizophrenic people out there, and this guy is just maybe one of them, and it's just like, I don't fucking care. You know, like I remember a scene where he goes into like a train tunnel thing, and he sees a train go by, and the train almost runs over him. He dodges right out of the way just at the last moment. And then he looks at the train passing by, and there's like these weird images on the train. Weird faces and faceless, ghostly apparatuses and strange-looking creatures in the train. And so he starts seeing weird shit. So it's kind of creepy in that way, but at the same time, it really wasn't like a scary movie. It wasn't scary enough where I was like, holy shit, this movie's amazing. It was just like, well, this guy's seeing some weird shit. Like, oh well, he's going nuts. You know, get some help. You know, go to the fucking doctor. and fucking get your shit fixed. Go get some medicine, some medication to fix your mental issues or something. It's just I don't know. I just didn't like it. I didn't enjoy it. It's a kind of movie that I didn't. It's not horrific for me. It's not a great movie. It's not an awesome horror movie. I've seen way better horror movies than Jacob's Ladder. There's way better ones out there that are actually horrific, that have gore, that have violence, that have killing, and even some that have the psychological aspects of it. And look, I understand. This is a psychological horror movie. Not every horror movie has to have fucking gore. I get it. Not every horror movie has to have some kind of killer. I get it. But this movie isn't that fucking good. I thought it was overrated as hell. I didn't like the characters. I didn't care about Jacob. I didn't give a fuck that he was seeing these stupid, weird shit. They weren't even scary. They were just kind of weird. Anyway, a better movie I'd like to suggest instead of Jacob's Ladder would be anything by David Lynch. So, David Lynch is a great director. I really like him, his style, for the most part. But particularly movies like Mulholland Drive. I thought Mulholland Drive was amazing. One of the best movies from the 2000s. It came out in 2001, and it's basically about this woman who sees a bunch of weird shit. And there's a lot of weird, like, fucking images in this movie that are kind of like surreal and just kind of dark and just kind of creepy. It's not a horror movie, so Mulholland Drive isn't a horror movie, and David Lynch really isn't a horror director. He's more about like neo-noir, mystery type stuff, kind of weird, creepy little things, kind of strange imagery and creepy imagery with creepy music. Very surreal, very like, holy shit, was that a dream? Oh, that was bizarre. Very cryptic narrative, so you're wondering what the hell's going on. It feels almost like a puzzle where you're trying to figure out what the hell is happening. What does that mean? What did that scene particularly mean? What was that message all about? So, a movie like Mulholland Drive or Lost Highway from the late 90s, another one from David Lynch, those movies I would rather recommend instead of fucking Jacob's Ladder. If you're talking about somebody who has some kind of problem in their head, and they start dealing with shit in their life, they start seeing weird things, they start experiencing weird shit, going through some kind of psychological shit. So that's it. Those are my top 5 overrated horror movies. These movies, they weren't like the worst horror movies of all time or anything like that. I wouldn't say that they're terribly shitty for the most part. Some of them were shitty, but at the same time, they were just overrated. They were given too much credit, or I felt like they were given too much praise, and I felt like they, even having a cult status or a cult fan base, I'm just like, it's really not that good of a movie. It's just kind of, it didn't really impress me that well. And there's way better horror movies out there that certainly deserve more credit and, should have more fucking praise. Anyway, that's it for this episode of The Review Space. Thank you guys for watching. Check out the channel for more videos, subscribe and all that good stuff, and until next time, peace.